Now, we've just gone through an election in the US and Donald Trump has come out the victor, winning the majority vote and also the college electoral vote as well. But what does Donald Trump's policies mean for us as Australians? What do all these tariffs and these threat of tariffs that he's imposing on a lot of the countries in the world mean for us here in Australia? This is what School Should Have Taught You, a podcast where I share with you everything you need to know about financial freedom.
Everything school should have taught you in one place. With a property portfolio of over 17 million and an accountancy firm of over 16,000 clients, as well as being an accountant to some of the wealthiest people in Australia, Jeremy Iannuzzelli will be sharing his lessons on everything school should have taught you so you can build the life you want.
I'm really looking forward to talk to you today about tariffs, about what the US election actually means for us here in Australia, and what the hell does all these tariff or threat of tariffs actually mean. Now you can see here I've got my Make America or Keep America Great Again hat on, a bit of a novelty that someone bought me one day when it was going through the US 2020 elections. But I really wanted to explain to you what the threat of tariffs actually mean. What is a tariff to start with? Now, a tariff is just a tax. It's a tax that a lot of countries impose on other countries that export or import goods into the country. It's been going around for a long time. Tariffs has been from the dawn of countries in trading with other countries. We're going back all the way through Roman times and all the way through the times prior to that. But it's never been really used as a threat. You know, Donald Trump has weaponized what a tariff means to keep America great again or to make America great again. And what he's imposing or what he's trying to do is he's trying to make sure that there's no trade deficit, meaning what America imports into the country doesn't exceed what they're exporting. Because if a country is importing lots of goods and services, but not really exporting to other countries, then they're not really generating wealth. You know, GDP, gross domestic product, and again, listen to one of my prior videos to understand what GDP actually means. But a country becomes wealthy when it exports. It's actually providing goods and services to other people around the world. So therefore bringing in lots of currency, lots of money from outside countries into their own. That's how countries become really wealthy. That's how countries like the Saudis or the Arab Emirates, a lot of exporting countries like China, that's how they've been able to build their wealth over the last 30 years. India, one of the major superpower houses of the modern century, is really starting to build a lot of wealth because they significantly export a huge amount of goods and services to other countries around the world. Yes, they do import quite a bit, but they're not in a trade deficit. They're actually in a trade surplus, meaning they export more than what they import. And America, for a long time, they've been importing substantially more than they've been exporting, which means with many countries, there's a deficit, and a lot of countries have been getting rich off what America's been importing over many years. So what does the threat of all these tariffs actually mean for us here in Australia, in the Southern Hemisphere, little continent on our own? Well, initially, not a huge amount, but in the future, it has substantial impacts. China is one of America's largest importing, exporting customers. China export a significant amount of goods and services to America. Now, if those goods and services overnight become substantially more expensive for American consumers, what it does do is it cuts the throat of the export system in China because they've just lost a significant exporting partner. And it's good for a lot of other countries because that will mean there'll be a lot of goods or potentially a lot of services floating around from this excess product that China's created, which means it needs to be dumped in a lot of countries. And guess what? When the supply significantly exceeds the demand, it means a lot of products, a lot of goods or services become significantly cheaper here in Australia. So in fact, it probably is a very good thing for us in the initial years. We're going to get a lot of cheap goods being dumped into our country, being Australia, and a lot of other countries in the world to soak up a huge amount of supply from China that America has just tariffed on what's been exported to them over many years. Now, positive, really good in the short term, but what's it mean in the long term? Well, the long term is that China starts to slow down. It doesn't need to produce a significant amount of goods or services anymore because they've lost a huge trading partner, which overnight the costs of those exports to America from China has substantially become more expensive. Great for America means they're no longer having a trade deficit with China. American businesses can start to fill that gap of what China's been exporting into America at significantly cheaper prices. But when China slows down, we all know here in Australia, they're our substantial trading partner. We need a China that's reliant on our exports, and our export being our minerals, our raw materials that we dig from the ground. And really that's what's kept Australia floating for many, many years, because we're a very lucky country. We've got a significant amount of raw materials that we just put a shovel into the ground and it comes out as cash. And the government relies on a huge portion of those royalties to be able to fund a lot of the government projects. So if China starts to slow down on the production of its goods and services that it exports to its major trading partner, being America, in Australia, we're going to start to feel the impacts of that, not initially. Initially, we'll have this very euphoric moment of substantial amount of goods and services that are getting dumped here in Australia at substantially cheaper prices, which is great for the initial issue that we have with inflation. But long term, China slowing down does have substantial impacts for here, being in Australia. So we want a very healthy import-export relationship with China and a lot of other countries. While Donald Trump is looking after the interest of Americans, substantially reducing the amount of exports that's coming into his country at significantly cheaper rates than what the American businesses can produce at. So yes, it helps the American businesses, which is great. A lot more American businesses are now supplying to the American public. It may mean that America might be a net exporter again, meaning they're exporting more than what they're importing. So that's fantastic for a large population of American citizens, and I applaud, a politician doing that, really looking after the interests of their people. But it does come at the expense of many other countries who rely on exporting cheap goods and services into America to feed a large portion of their population. And China's been doing that for the last 30 years and hence been a very prosperous country, not just exporting to America, but exporting to a large number of other countries as well. But if you do slow down their major export partner, then it will have ripple effects in the economy. Now, Australia needs a very healthy relationship, as I mentioned before, with China to float a lot of our government projects and royalties. And if that stuff starts to slow down, then we'll see Australia's economy really start to cool off, without the raw mineral sector being able to subsidise a lot of the cool off that's happening around many of the sectors that Australia has. So short term, we're going to see some really euphoric moments, a lot of cheap goods and services, and long term, all these tariffs that's happening with America and a lot of other countries around the world, we will start to see the ripple effects. And it goes back to that old saying, when America coughs, Australia catches the flu. It hasn't been like that so much in the past, again, because of our strong mineral sector. But if we start to see these tariffs heavily get imposed, we will be in for some rocky roads ahead of us. So it's very important to understand what China's relationship with America and with us has on our local domestic economy, especially for the raw mineral sector. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens over the next 2 to 3 years, really understanding what happens with the export-import issue and tariffs that America's putting around a lot of countries around the world, I should say, and what impacts that has for us and what slowdown that we might see as a result of China not exporting a substantial amount of goods or services into other countries. It's really important to understand that our economy and continent really relies on being able to export services or goods around the world. That's how a country becomes rich. Because if we're not exporting, then it's really just passing wealth around from one person to the next, with you feeling very wealthy today, and then you're having to spend that money, the next person feeling really wealthy and you feeling really poor, and that doesn't bring a lot of confidence to the economy. So it's really important. You need to monitor what's happening in global politics, also in global economics as well. We've got a number of, and we won't call them world wars, but there's a number of wars going on around the world with Russia and Ukraine, and also in Israel and Gaza and the Palestinians. And these are all geopolitical issues that really will start to have impacts the longer that these really pan out. So you need to make sure that you're understanding what's happening in the world, be up to date with world news, follow what's going on with trade wars around other countries, understand how important our global trading partners are, not only to us in Australia, but to other economies as well. Because if economy is cool, we're not going to ride into the sunset feeling all happy and chappy. It's going to be one of those things that as global economies cool, Australia has to follow suit. We're very lucky in the GFC because we had a very strong balance sheet through many years of saving a lot of what the raw mineral sector was able to produce and provide. But our balance sheet is not as strong this time. We're now in a deficit in the budget. We're now in a deficit in terms of our balance sheet. And it's going to be very interesting what Australian politicians do if there is a cooling Chinese economy, because they've really got us out of trouble many, many times, especially during the GFC. And I don't think with the tariffs that Donald Trump's going to impose, it's going to be the same predicament. So be very wary of what's happening around the world from a global economic position, also from a geopolitical position as well. Be up to date with world affairs. Don't make decisions purely on what one man says or what one government is doing in a certain country in the world, but understand if there is impacts of those decisions and what those impacts mean for us being an economy here in Australia. I'm really hoping you're enjoying the content of what school should have taught you. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, or if you're following us on iTunes or Spotify, don't forget to like that as well. I look forward to speaking to you next week. That's what school should have taught you. I'm Iannuzzelli, and I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.